Hi, this is Instruction and Outreach Librarian Nathan Stansel. Thank you for taking a few minutes of your day today to view this presentation on the basics of APA 7. As you may have heard already, APA, the American Psychological Association, updated its formatting and style guide and released a new manual last October. The idea was that the 2019-2020 academic year would be a year of transition, and that most institutions would have transitioned to APA 7 by fall 2020. So the purpose of this presentation is to present a couple of the big changes that have taken place between APA 6 and APA 7. Before we begin the presentation, we will make a disclaimer though, that some of the resources that I will show you toward the end, such as the Purdue OWL website, have retained an archived version of all its resources on APA 6. So if you're mainly concerned with your students just following a format and perhaps not navigating to this new version during this semester, those resources will still be available. So one of the first big changes that has taken place with APA 7 is that it has now set up and accepts two different paper formats. So the screenshot on the left shows you what has been our traditional sort of setup. You'll notice near the top that we still have the running head. You see in the first section a title page that would be set up as we have traditionally done. And then we move on to the abstract page, page 2. We still see the running head and so forth, just like we've been doing for all of APA 6. So this remains in place, but it's now referred to as the professional paper format. So the second format that has now become acceptable is a much more streamlined version, and this is called the student paper format. So you'll notice near the top that the primary change with this format is that we've eliminated the running head, which gave so many students such a difficult time getting it set up and formatted the way it needed to be. And you'll notice that when we move down to the second page that has also been eliminated all the way throughout the page, all throughout the paper, so that now what we have is simply a page number that runs continuously all throughout the paper in the upper right hand corner. And then, though it's small, you can see from the example with the student paper how that's tweaked a little bit for the title page to include the department, university, course, and so forth, instead of the affiliations that would be with an author. So the student paper format is intended for students who are submitting work in an academic institution, whereas the professional paper is intended to be for anyone who intends to submit their paper for publication. So the dilemma we face here is that it's probable that some of the departments on our campus will prefer the professional paper, and then others would be content with the student paper format. So as we think about the fact that there are now two different acceptable formats, it's going to be necessary that that is clarified when making assignments, especially for those who come to the library for assistance or who work with some of the tutors on campus, so that it's clear what is being required, what is expected. So again, the first big change between APA 6 and APA 7 is that we now have the simplified student paper format for submission in academic institutions. A second major change in APA 7 is that there are now a great number more fonts that are permitted for use. So we had customarily been moving toward this with some of our instructors allowing, you can use Calibri 11 or something of that nature, but now we have all these different fonts that are acceptable for use with specified point sizes. APA does not mandate which of these is necessary or preferable for use. It leaves that for an instructor's interpretation or for a publisher's preference. So again, that might be something you would want to clarify for your students at the time you make an assignment. The one thing APA 7 does specify is that whichever font you use, that you use it consistently throughout your paper. And I guess perhaps some of the rationale behind that could be, one, if students were using a lot of different headings, they may think it's really cool or really neat to use one font for all the headings and then a different font for the body. And that's frowned upon by APA. So the same font consistently throughout the paper. I guess another rationale might be to clarify that in some research it has been noted that certain fonts are preferable for calling attention, such as for use in presentations or use for sort of bulleted point items, whereas others are actually easier to read in blocks of text. So perhaps that specification is to make sure that people don't think they're calling attention with one font in their headings and making it easier to read using a different font in the body of their paper. The third change that we'll note is that the pronoun they is now going to be regarded as a singular pronoun. It has been being regarded as a gender-neutral pronoun, and that remains the case, but it now becomes a singular pronoun as well. So we have an example here of how that would show up in a paper. So the sentence in the example reads, "I don't know who wrote this note, but he or she has great handwriting." So previously we used he or she because the way the sentence is constructed, we needed a singular pronoun, and he or she are singular pronouns, and we use the he or she trying not to be sexist. So now we're doing away with all of the he or she, and we're just going to write, "I don't know who wrote this note, but they have great handwriting." I don't anticipate that this will be a big problem or adjustment for most of our students because many of us speak that way anyway. We already use they and them as a singular pronoun, and so this shouldn't be too difficult of a transition. Fourth change that we will note is that quotation marks are now going to be used to add emphasis to a word or phrase rather than putting that word or phrase in italics. So again, we have an example where the sentence reads, "That was an awesome concert," with awesome being typed in italics. We're now going to change that and put our quotation marks around the word awesome, as you see in the last sentence on the screen. The rationale behind this shift relates to assistive technologies and the quotation marks being easier for many screen reading softwares to understand and help users to comprehend what is going on, that this is the word that is being emphasized. I have had one student express some concern about the use of quotation marks in this way and it being sort of too much within a paper because you're putting quotation marks around what you want to emphasize as well as the material that you are citing when you're quoting directly. So we may need to help our students realize there are other ways that we can add emphasis, changing the structure of a sentence around a bit, and also to realize that you probably don't want to overly emphasize different things within your paper. Another note I'm going to list here regarding APA 7 relates to one space following the end mark of a sentence. So this has become pretty widespread and common practice as we neared the end of the life of APA 6, but it is now specified within APA 7 as being sort of the quote-unquote rule, one space following the end mark of a sentence. However, you'll see at the last of this little note, this is completely subject to what the instructor or the publisher prefers. So if you don't mind if students have 2 spaces after their period, that's okay. You just need to make that clear to your students. And then finally, there have been a number of changes to how citations are going to be formatted. So I've got here a list of the most common things, and we'll go through these a little bit. First, the DOI, or Digital Object Identifier, is now going to be set up as a URL. So what we're doing in APA 7 is moving away from using the URL assigned by a database for a specific article, and instead replacing that with the DOI. So those of you who've played around in our databases a good bit know that most of the articles already have those assigned, and in some of the databases it's already set up as a URL sort of on the landing page. In some of the others, you may have to move a tab over and look in the details section, and generally if you scroll down a little bit you'll find this already set up. So again, I've had some students who they're not sure why this would be a big deal. So the difference is the URL is sort of tangible. It can change, whereas the DOI lives with that article throughout its existence. One of our instructors has a good example that she uses to explain this. The URL is sort of like the address on your driver's license. It can change. It's still associated with you, your driver's license, but the address you have on there can change as you go throughout life. Whereas something like a birth certificate or a social security number, social security card, is going to be permanent. That's going to be tied to you throughout your whole life, and that's more reflective of the DOI. So again, we're going to move away from the URL for things in the databases and instead use the DOI set up as a URL. Secondly, and again, this is something that instructors and publishers still have some say on, meaning you can still require it if you prefer it, but the name of a database in the citation when you use an article is now omitted. It's okay to leave that database out in most cases. So the idea behind this is that if I'm a student submitting a paper to you, you already have access to the same databases. You're not going to have difficulty retrieving that article. It should just be a matter of clicking on the DOI or the URL, whatever the case may be, and being able to follow and gain access to the databases and find the article. And on the flip side, if I were in a professional setting, the assumption is I should be able to, based on what is provided in the citation, find that article for myself, even if it is from a different database. The database it comes from is not important in most cases. It's just the other aspects that would help me find the article. So the exception to this change is that if I were in a very, very disciplined area, an area where most folks would not have access to a particular database because of its rarity, then I would still want to list that database as an indicator to those who are reading my paper that there may be some difficulty in locating this article among general databases. Okay, so the third thing that we're going to see as a change in our citation formatting is that the use of phrases retrieved from and accessed on have been minimized. All right, so we're going to see these still, but they're going to be tied to things that are designed to change, for which there is no archival version. So if we were using a general website, we would probably still be seeing these things because it would be pertinent. If I were citing a blog or something of that nature where we expect the content to change frequently, it would still be pertinent to list the retrieve from, accessed on, as we have in the past, because what I find today is not what I'm going to find tomorrow. However, many of the things we use do have archived versions. For instance, Wikipedia has a history, and the expectation is not to use accessed on, retrieved from with things like Wikipedia, because we can go back in the history and use the URL from that exact article, what I'm seeing at that date in time. So again, the frequency of these two phrases will reduce in number. Next, the publisher location and formats are no longer required. So it's now not really relevant to list that this was published in New York or that this was the Kindle version. Again, it goes back sort of to what we were speaking about before. Sort of the assumption is that if you provided the other publication content, you should be able to locate the resource on your own. Where it was published, the format it was in is not as significant. And the final note I have here for this section relates to in-text citations. At this point, when we have 3 or more authors for a given work, we can now reduce that when we're doing our in-text citation to just the first author and the abbreviation et al. Okay, so I have listed for you a couple of resources on APA 7. The first is APA itself. And at this link, you will find a long list, fairly lengthy list, of different tutorials on the different changes, setting up citations, the difference between the DOI and the URL, and things of this nature. So those are generally fairly short, and again, they are available through APA's site. And then, of course, we frequently refer students to Purdue OWL, such as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. And Purdue has a lot of resources available. So one of the things that is very valuable with Purdue OWL relates to the fact that we're still in transition to APA 7, and that means that the databases the library uses, those citation generators, are still being updated. So through Purdue OWL, students can look at the resource they want to use, and they can see examples and templates of what a citation for that particular resource should look like. In other words, at this moment, the citation generators are going to be more reflective of APA 6 than APA 7, though we're getting there. And it's going to be important, especially for the articles from databases and things, that students cross-reference with another resource, such as Purdue OWL, to make sure that what they are submitting is correct. So I'd like to thank you again for your time, and I've included my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you may have, or if you note any particular issues that your students are having that I may be able to help with as they move to APA 7, please let me know what those are. Thank you.